This story is titled, "My Parents Constantly Humiliated Me by Comparing Me to My Brother Because They Love Him More, so I stopped paying all family bills and they cut contact until financial desperation made them apologize." Hey Reddit, my name is Marcus, and I'm 27 years old. I work as an operations manager for a regional shipping company here in Tampa, where I handle supply chain management, vendor relationships, and freight coordination. It's not the most glamorous job in the world, but I'm genuinely good at what I do, and it pays me about $68,000 a year. That salary goes pretty far in Florida when you're only supporting yourself, which is something I thought I was doing until recently. I rent a nice 2-bedroom apartment in West Chase. It's nothing fancy, but it has a pool, decent neighbors, and most importantly, it's mine. No roommates to deal with, no drama to navigate, just peace and quiet. Or at least, that's what my living situation was supposed to be like. Peaceful and quiet. Unfortunately, my family had other plans and kept treating my apartment like their personal customer service center, and me like their personal bank. I've been working since I was 15 years old. My very first job was as a bag boy at Publix, making $7.25 an hour, and I loved every single penny because it was mine. I worked there all through high school, never missing shifts, always showing up on time. After graduation, I got a job at Home Depot while simultaneously attending community college. It didn't matter if I had to work nights, weekends, or holidays. I was absolutely determined to pay my own way through school without relying on anyone else. I earned my associate's degree in business administration, and I paid for it entirely with a combination of student loans and my Home Depot paychecks. I didn't receive any help from my family, no handouts, no financial assistance of any kind. It was just me grinding it out semester by semester, working my ass off to build something for myself. After graduation, I worked my way up from a warehouse associate to my current position over the course of 5 years. Every single promotion I earned was based on merit, and every raise I received was justified by my performance and dedication. My family, however, is a completely different story. My mother, Linda, is 52 years old and has never held a steady job in her entire adult life. And when I say never, I mean absolutely never. She's had maybe a dozen different jobs over the years, but none of them have lasted more than 8 months. There's always some excuse for why she can't keep working. Sometimes the manager was mean to her, sometimes her coworkers were jealous of her, and sometimes the work was just too stressful for someone with her various medical conditions. What conditions, you might ask? Well, that depends entirely on what week it is. Sometimes it's fibromyalgia that's keeping her from working. Other times it's anxiety that's too overwhelming to manage. Sometimes it's chronic fatigue syndrome that makes it impossible for her to function. It's always something that's conveniently impossible to prove, but convenient enough to explain why she can't hold down employment. She spends most of her days watching daytime television, scrolling through Facebook, and complaining about how hard her life is to anyone who will listen to her. My mother has developed this victim mentality down to an absolute art form. Everything that goes wrong in her life is always someone else's fault, and everyone around her owes her something because she's supposedly been through so much hardship. It's exhausting to be around someone who refuses to take responsibility for anything in their life. My father, Robert, is 54 years old and works sporadically at various warehouse and construction jobs around the Tampa area. When he's actually working, he makes decent money, usually somewhere between $18 to $20 an hour, which isn't bad for this area. The problem is that he absolutely cannot hold a job to save his life. He's got this massive attitude problem where he thinks every boss is an idiot and every workplace is somehow beneath him. He'll show up late, take extended lunch breaks, and argue with supervisors about everything. Then he acts completely shocked and offended when he inevitably gets fired. Between jobs, my father sits around the house in his underwear, watching sports on television and playing mobile games on his phone. He'll spend weeks at a time looking for work, which mostly involves browsing job websites for about 5 minutes each day and then complaining that nobody wants to hire experienced workers anymore. It's like watching a masterclass in self-sabotage and learned helplessness. And then there's my precious little brother Dylan, who is 24 years old, a college dropout, and still living at home with our parents. Dylan is the undisputed golden child of our family. According to my parents, Dylan is creative and artistic, and he just needs time to find his passion and develop his talents. He's been finding his passion for about 6 years now while working maybe 12 hours a week at Comic Universe, which is a local comic book and gaming store. Dylan has this whole artist persona going on. He draws, he writes stories, and he makes YouTube videos about comic books that get maybe 50 views each. My parents are absolutely convinced that he's going to be the next Stan Lee, or something equally ridiculous. Meanwhile, he makes about $400 a month and contributes exactly $0 to household expenses. But here's the thing about Dylan. He's incredibly charming and funny. He's got this easy confidence that makes people want to like him immediately. He can walk into any room, and within 10 minutes, everyone there thinks he's the coolest guy they've ever met. I used to really admire that quality about him when we were kids. Now I realize it's just manipulation wrapped up in charisma, and he's been using those skills to coast through life while everyone else picks up the slack for him. The family dynamic in our household was established early in our childhood and never changed as we grew up. Dylan was always considered the fun one, the creative one, the one with unlimited potential waiting to be unlocked. I, on the other hand, was labeled as the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who could always be counted on to figure things out when problems arose. What this really meant in practice was that Dylan got praised and celebrated simply for existing, while I got completely ignored unless someone needed something fixed, paid for, or handled. Growing up, if Dylan brought home a C on a test, my parents would say, "Well, you tried your best, and that's what matters most." But if I brought home a B+, the response was always, "Why wasn't this an A? We know you're capable of better than this." Dylan's mediocre drawings would get hung on the refrigerator like they were masterpieces heading straight to the Louvre, while my academic achievements earned me a pat on the head and a reminder not to get too big for my britches. During high school, Dylan played JV soccer for exactly 2 seasons before quitting because he claimed the pressure was too much for him to handle. My parents talked about his brief athletic career for years afterward, like he'd been personally recruited by Duke University. Meanwhile, I was working 20 hours a week, maintaining a 3.8 GPA, and graduated with honors. They actually forgot to come to my graduation ceremony because Dylan had a really important comic convention that same weekend that they absolutely had to attend with him. College was more of the same pattern, just amplified. Dylan dropped out after 1 semester, claiming that his professors didn't understand his creative vision and were stifling his artistic growth. My parents were incredibly sympathetic to his situation. College wasn't for everyone, they explained. Maybe he'd be better off pursuing his art directly instead of wasting time in classrooms. At least he was following his dreams and staying true to himself, which was more important than any degree. When I graduated with my business degree, our family celebration consisted of dinner at Chili's, where my parents spent the majority of the meal discussing Dylan's latest comic book project and his plans for future creative endeavors. I genuinely thought this was normal family behavior at the time. Every family has a favorite child, right? Every family has different expectations for different kids based on their personalities and strengths. I told myself that I was actually lucky to be seen as the capable one, the one they could always count on to handle things. What I didn't realize back then was that being the one they could count on was just family code for the one who will pay for everything when we need money. The financial manipulation started small when I was still in college, around 2019. It was never presented as manipulation, of course. It was always framed as family helping family, just until they could get back on their feet. And, we'd do the same thing for you if the situation were reversed. It began with a phone call during my second year of school. My mother called me crying, explaining that my father had been laid off from his warehouse job unexpectedly. They were behind on rent, and could I possibly help them with groceries for just this 1 week? I had maybe $200 in my checking account after paying for tuition and textbooks, but I sent her $100 because that's what you do for family, right? That's what being a good son means. Stepping up when your parents are struggling. The next month, it was the electric bill that they needed help with. The month after that, it was car insurance. There was always some crisis, always some emergency that required immediate financial intervention, and somehow I was always presented as the solution to their problems. "Marcus, honey, you're so good with money. Could you help us figure out this budget? Marcus, you work with numbers all day. Maybe you could look at our bills and see where we're going wrong. Marcus, we hate to ask, but you're the only one who's got his life together right now." The requests kept getting bigger and more frequent as time went on. By my senior year, I was basically paying half of their household expenses while simultaneously drowning in my own student loans and working 30 hours a week at Home Depot. But here's the truly insidious part of their strategy. They were really good at making me feel like a hero for helping them. Every single time I sent money, I got a flood of gratitude in return. My mother would text me paragraphs about what a wonderful son I was, how proud they were of me, and how they didn't know what they would do without me. my father would call and talk about how mature and responsible I was, and how I was nothing like other kids my age who only cared about themselves. This felt incredible for a kid who had spent most of his life feeling invisible next to his charismatic younger brother. Being seen as the family savior was absolutely intoxicating. I was important. I was needed. I was the hero of this story. What I didn't see at the time was the dynamic they were systematically creating. Every time I solved one of their problems with money, they learned that they didn't have to solve it themselves. Every time I bailed them out of a crisis, they learned that crises weren't really their responsibility to handle. They were training me to be their permanent safety net, and I was enthusiastically volunteering for the job. After graduation in 2021, I finally got my entry-level position at the shipping company and moved into a small one-bedroom apartment. I thought this would be the moment when I could finally focus on my own life for once. I had plans to pay down my student loans aggressively, build up some savings, and maybe even start dating seriously. I was ready to be an independent adult living my own life. But the requests from my family kept coming. And in fact, they got significantly worse. Now that I had a real job with a steady salary, their expectations skyrocketed completely. It wasn't just groceries and utilities anymore. Now they needed help with much bigger expenses. Car repairs, medical bills, home maintenance projects. Everything was always urgent, always essential, and always framed as just this once, even though it was happening every single month. The worst part was how they would frame these requests. It was never a straightforward, "Can you give us money?" It was always, "Can you help us figure this out?" As if I was some kind of financial consultant they had hired, rather than their son being systematically bled dry by their constant needs. By 2022, I was sending them money every single month like clockwork. And these weren't small amounts either. Usually, I was transferring between $200 and $2,000 each month. Some months, it was even more if there was a special situation that required extra assistance. Here's exactly how their system worked, and I can see now that it was incredibly well orchestrated. Around the 20th of each month, my mother would start texting me about how tight things were getting financially. Just casual mentions at first, things like, "Ugh, bills are so expensive these days," or "I don't know how people make ends meet anymore." This was what I now recognize as the softening up phase, designed to plant the seed in my mind that money problems were coming. By the 25th of the month, the situation would escalate dramatically. Suddenly, my father's hours had been cut at work, or my mother's medical condition was acting up and preventing her from looking for employment, or Dylan's comic book store was having a particularly slow month, so his already minimal income was even more pathetic than usual. The crisis was always someone else's fault and always completely beyond their control. By the 30th of the month, it was a full-blown emergency. The power was going to be shut off, or they were going to be evicted from their house, or my mother needed medication that she couldn't afford. They needed exactly X amount of money by tomorrow, or something terrible and irreversible would happen to them. And like clockwork, I would transfer the money immediately because what kind of son lets his parents get evicted? What kind of brother lets his family go without electricity? I was completely trapped by my own decency and their absolute lack of shame about exploiting it. But here's what I didn't know at the time, and this is the part that still makes me furious when I think about it. They had backup plans. I found out much later that my mother had been getting money from her sister Janet on a regular basis. My father had been borrowing money from his brother Kevin. They had taken out payday loans, opened multiple credit cards, and even gotten financial assistance from their church. I wasn't their only source of income. I was just their most reliable one, the one they could count on to never say no or ask too many difficult questions. The really messed up part was how they talked about money whenever I was around them. They would constantly complain about being broke, about how hard it was to make ends meet, about how they didn't know what they were going to do to survive. But then I would see Facebook posts showing them having dinner at Olive Garden, or Dylan would casually mention some new video game he had bought, or my mother would show up to family gatherings with a brand new purse. When I would ask about these purchases, there was always a perfectly reasonable explanation ready. The dinner out was a rare treat that had been paid for with birthday money from my grandmother. Dylan's video game was used and practically free from a friend. My mother's purse was a gift from a friend who didn't want it anymore. There was always a reason why their spending didn't contradict the poverty story they were selling me. I was so focused on being the good son, the responsible one, the family hero, that I never stopped to ask the obvious question. Why do 3 adults need constant financial help from someone who makes less money than all of them combined should have been making if they were actually working? Looking back now, There were red flags everywhere. Huge, obvious, waving in the wind red flags that I completely ignored because I had been conditioned to see their problems as my responsibility to solve. Red flag number 1. They never had a clear budget or any idea where their money actually went. When I would ask to see their expenses so I could help them plan better and maybe find ways to cut costs, there was always an excuse. The bills were somewhere around here. Or my mother was still organizing everything, or they would show me everything next time. Next time never came, of course. Red flag number 2. Their emergencies were always exactly urgent enough to prevent me from thinking too hard about them. It was never, "We'll need help next month so we can plan ahead." It was always, "We need help by tomorrow, or we're completely screwed." No time to research alternatives, no time to ask questions, no time to think rationally. Just immediate panic and the need for instant solutions. Red flag number 3. My help never actually solved anything long-term. I would pay their electric bill in February, and they would need help with the electric bill again in April. I would cover their rent in May, and they would be behind on rent again in July. If my money was actually helping them get back on their feet, shouldn't their situation have improved over time instead of staying exactly the same? Red flag number 4. They never contributed anything to family gatherings or events, but they always had strong opinions about how things should be done. When we had family dinners, I would bring the food and drinks. When it was someone's birthday, I would chip in for gifts and often end up organizing the entire celebration. But somehow my parents and Dylan always showed up empty-handed with elaborate excuses about why they couldn't contribute anything. Yet they never hesitated to criticize how events were planned or complain if things weren't exactly to their liking. Red flag number 5. Dylan's lifestyle never matched his income, and this was the big one I should have caught immediately. He was making maybe $600 a month at the comic book store, working part-time hours. But he had expensive hobbies, ate out regularly, bought new clothes constantly, went to concerts and movies, and was always acquiring new electronics and gadgets. Even living at home rent-free, his expenses should have far exceeded his income based on the lifestyle he was maintaining. Where was all that extra money coming from? I was too naive to connect the dots. Red flag number 6. They had absolutely zero interest in financial advice or help getting back on their feet permanently. I would offer to help them apply for better jobs, look at their budget in detail, or research assistance programs that might help them become self-sufficient. They would nod and agree that it was a great idea, then never follow through on any of it. They didn't want solutions to their problems. They wanted money to continue funding their current lifestyle. But the biggest red flag of all was how they talked about other people who had helped them in the past. My mother's sister Janet had apparently been really selfish lately and wasn't helping as much as she used to. My father's brother Kevin was going through a weird phase and had stopped lending them money. Their church had changed their assistance policy and wasn't as generous as they had been before. Everyone who had been helping them eventually became the bad guy when they stopped providing financial support. Everyone except me because I was too stupid to stop. The thing that really opened my eyes happened almost by accident in late 2022. I was refinancing my car loan to get a better interest rate, and I needed to provide proof of residence to the bank. Simple enough. I just needed a utility bill with my name and address on it. But when I called the electric company to request a copy of my most recent bill, they told me something very interesting. According to their records, I had 2 active accounts with them. One was for my apartment, which made perfect sense. But the other was for a house in Clearwater, which was my parents' address. There had to be some mistake, I told the customer service representative. I didn't live at that address and had never set up service there. Well, sir, the account has been active since April 2020, and the bills are paid automatically from a bank account ending in 4127, she explained. That was my checking account number. I hung up immediately and started calling other utility companies. Gas company, water department, internet provider, same story everywhere. I had active service accounts for my parents' house. All of them had been set up in 2020, and all of them were being paid automatically from my bank account. I had been paying their utilities for over 2 years without even knowing it. When I pulled up my bank statements and actually looked at them carefully, I could see the automatic payments clear as day. I had just never paid attention because the amounts weren't huge individually. $80 for electric, $156 for gas, $78 for water, $95 for internet. About $418 total per month that I had been unconsciously paying while they asked me for emergency money to cover utility bills that I was already paying for them. That's when I realized they had been double-dipping the entire time. They were getting me to pay their actual bills through automatic payments that I didn't know about. And then they were asking me for additional emergency money to cover utilities that were already taken care of. I had been funding their lifestyle while they cried poverty to my face and begged for help with expenses I was already covering. I felt like such a complete idiot. 2 years of auto pay statements were right there in black and white, and I had never noticed because I trusted them implicitly. Because family doesn't lie to family, right? Because when your parents say they need help with the electric bill, you don't think to check whether you're already paying their electric bill automatically. After discovering the utilities situation, I decided to pull my credit report for the first time in years. I had always been pretty responsible with my credit. Never missed payments, kept my balances low, maintained a good score. So I had never felt the need to monitor it closely, which turned out to be a huge mistake. There were 4 hard inquiries on my report that I didn't recognize, all from the past 18 months. 2 were from credit card companies, 1 was from a personal loan company, and 1 was from a car dealership. I called each company to find out what was going on and get to the bottom of these unauthorized credit checks. The credit card inquiries were for applications that had been submitted but ultimately declined due to inconsistent information. Basically, someone had used my social security number to apply for credit cards, but they had provided different employment information than what was actually in my credit file, so the applications were rejected. The personal loan inquiry was much more concerning. Not only had an application been submitted, but it had actually been approved. There was currently an active loan in my name for $8,500. According to the loan company, payments were being made on time, so it wasn't showing as delinquent on my credit report. But it was definitely there, definitely affecting my credit utilization, and definitely something I had never applied for or authorized. The car dealership inquiry was from Dylan's Camaro purchase. They had pulled my credit as part of his financing application, listing me as a co-signer on the loan. Except I had never co-signed anything for Dylan or anyone else. I was starting to feel physically sick as the scope of their deception became clear. This wasn't just financial dependence anymore. This was outright identity theft being committed by my own family members. I spent the next week making phone calls, filing disputes, and requesting documentation to understand the full scope of what had been done to me. The picture that emerged was even worse than I had initially imagined. The personal loan had been taken out in my name using my social security number, but the contact information listed was my parents' address and my mother's phone number. The money had been deposited into a bank account that I had never heard of, one that had been opened in my name but at a branch location near their house. The car financing paperwork was equally disturbing. It listed me as Dylan's co-signer, complete with my income information and employment details that were accurate. My signature was on the documents, but it wasn't actually my signature. It was close enough that someone had clearly practiced forging it, but when I looked carefully, I could tell it wasn't mine. When I finally confronted them about all of this, their response was classic deflection and gaslighting. "Oh, that loan thing? Yeah, we were going to tell you about that," my mother said casually, as if taking out a loan in someone else's name was just a minor oversight. "We just needed to get caught up on some bills, and we figured since you're always helping us anyway, it would be easier to just handle it this way." "You committed identity theft," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Don't be so dramatic, Marcus. It's not like we were trying to hurt you," my father chimed in. "We're making the payments on time, so your credit is fine. If anything, we're helping your credit score by showing consistent payment history. You forged my signature on Dylan's car loan. Dylan really needed reliable transportation for work," my mother explained, as if this justified everything. "You know how hard it is for young people these days to get financing on their own. We just needed to help him out, and you have better credit than any of us." They genuinely didn't understand why I was upset. In their minds, since I was always giving them money anyway, cutting out the middleman and just taking it directly was simply more efficient. They were actually doing me a favor by not bothering me with constant requests for money. The audacity was absolutely breathtaking. With all this background context, you can probably understand why I wasn't particularly excited about my 27th birthday dinner in April 2024. I hadn't seen any of them in about 4 months, partly because I had been busy with work, but mostly because every single interaction lately had turned into some kind of financial discussion or request for assistance. But my mother kept texting me about how much they missed me and how they had something really special planned for my birthday celebration. Against my better judgment, I decided to give them another chance. Maybe, just maybe, We could have one family dinner that could just be about family for once, without any hidden agendas or financial manipulation. I stopped at Walmart on the way to their house and picked up a bottle of sparkling cider and a nice vanilla candle for my mother. Nothing expensive, but I wanted to make an effort and show that I was trying to be a good family member. I even showered and put on a decent button-down shirt because I thought that maybe, just maybe, we could have one normal family gathering where I felt valued as more than just a walking ATM. When I pulled into their driveway, the first thing I saw was the Chevy Camaro. It was brand new, still had temporary tags, and the metallic red paint job was gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. It was absolutely beautiful and definitely not cheap. Dylan came bouncing out of the house before I had even turned off my engine, with the keys jingling in his hand like he had been waiting by the window for me to arrive. "Oh wow, Marcus actually showed up," he said with this big grin plastered across his face. "Guess you're not too important for your family after all." It was meant to be joking, but there was a definite edge to his comment that I didn't like. It felt like he was testing me somehow, or trying to establish some kind of dominance right from the start. Inside the house, the atmosphere was incredibly weird. My mother was being overly cheerful in that fake way that people get when they're hiding something big and trying to overcompensate. She kept hugging me and telling me how handsome I looked and how proud she was of me and what a wonderful son I was. My father was avoiding eye contact completely, just grunting a brief hello and immediately turning his attention back to the television. Dylan, meanwhile, was practically vibrating with excitement. He kept finding excuses to mention his new car and asking if I had seen it parked outside. The keys never left his hand. He was constantly fidgeting with them, making sure they made noise so everyone would be reminded of his new acquisition. The dinner itself was awkward from the very beginning. My mother had made meatloaf, which was nice, but the conversation was stilted and strange. They kept talking about Dylan's career at the comic book store like he was running a Fortune 500 company instead of working part-time retail. "Dylan's been getting more responsibilities at work," my mother said proudly. "They're letting him handle special orders now, which shows how much they trust his expertise. And I'm thinking about starting a podcast about comic book investing," Dylan added with enthusiasm. "There's real money in collectibles if you know what you're doing and can identify trends before they go mainstream." Nobody asked about my work, my life, my interests, or anything about me at all. Nothing. It was just Dylan this, Dylan that, while I sat there thinking about the $3,200 I had sent them just 2 weeks earlier for what my mother had described as an emergency car repair situation. After dinner, my father stood up and cleared his throat like he was about to make some kind of big announcement. I thought that maybe finally they would acknowledge that it was my birthday and that I had been helping them out financially for years. Maybe they would show some genuine appreciation for everything I had done for them. "I want to make a toast," he said, raising his glass of Diet Coke with ceremony. I thought this might be the moment when they would finally recognize my contributions to keeping their household afloat, or at least acknowledge that it was supposed to be my special day. "To Dylan," he continued, completely crushing any hope I had for recognition, "for never giving up on his dreams and for always being there when this family needs him most, for sticking by us through thick and thin and showing us what real family loyalty looks like." I nearly choked on my drink. Dylan had been unemployed more months than he had been employed over the past 3 years. He contributed maybe $300 a month to household expenses on his absolute best months. And most months, he contributed nothing at all. But somehow, in this alternate reality my parents had created, he was the family hero who was always there when they needed him. "Dylan, you're an inspiration to all of us," my father continued with his toast. "Here's to following your passion and never letting anyone tell you that your dreams don't matter." Dylan beamed with pride and raised his glass enthusiastically. "Thanks, Dad. Family first, always," he said with conviction, as if he had been the one making sacrifices for everyone else. Then came present time, and this was the moment that broke something fundamental and irreparable in my relationship with these people. Dylan's present was the keys to the Camaro. Not just the keys, but the actual gift was the car itself. A $36,000 vehicle, fully loaded, brand new off the lot. My parents had apparently been planning this surprise for months, saving up and coordinating with the dealership to make it happen. "We know how hard you've been working," my mother told Dylan, as she ceremoniously handed him the keys with tears in her eyes. "And we know your old car was giving you trouble and making your life more difficult than it needed to be. We wanted to make sure you had reliable transportation so you could focus on building your career and pursuing your dreams." Dylan's old car was a 2019 Honda Civic that ran perfectly fine and had less than 40,000 miles on it. The only trouble it was giving him was that it wasn't impressive enough for his taste and didn't fit the image he wanted to project to his friends and potential romantic interests. My present was handed to me after Dylan's celebration had finally died down and the attention had moved away from his new car. It was a Walmart gift card for $20, not in an envelope, not wrapped, not presented with any ceremony whatsoever. Just a plastic card slid across the table toward me like a tip for a waiter who had provided mediocre service. "We figured you could use it for groceries or gas or whatever," my mother said, already looking at her phone instead of making eye contact with me. "You're always so practical with money, so we thought something useful would be better than something decorative." $20 for my 27th birthday, after years of sending them thousands of dollars every single month, after paying their utilities without even knowing it, after having my identity stolen for loans and car purchases that I never authorized. Dylan got a $36,000 car, and I got a $20 gift card to Walmart. And that's when everything finally clicked into place for me. I wasn't their son. I was their ATM with legs and feelings that they occasionally had to pretend to care about to keep me functioning properly. The birthday gifts made their priorities crystal clear. Dylan was the beloved family member whose dreams and comfort mattered. I was the financial resource who existed to fund their lifestyle. I left that dinner without making a scene. I just mumbled a quick thanks for the gift card and said I had to get home early because I had an important meeting at work the next day. But driving back to my apartment, my mind was racing with questions that I should have been asking for years. How exactly did they afford a $36,000 car when they had been asking me for emergency money just 2 weeks earlier? The math didn't add up at all. Even if my father was working full-time at $18 per hour and Dylan was pulling in his usual $400 per month from the comic book store, their combined income was maybe $3,500 per month. With rent, utilities, food, and other basic expenses, there was absolutely no way they had car payment money left over, let alone the money for a substantial down payment. Unless, of course, utilities weren't actually their expense. Unless someone else was covering their basic living costs, freeing up their entire income for luxuries like brand new sports cars. I got home and immediately started going through my bank statements with fresh eyes, really looking at the numbers instead of just glancing at my account balance like I usually did. The totals were absolutely staggering. In the past 2 years alone, I had transferred $47,832 directly to them through various emergency requests and crisis situations. That was money I had consciously sent, thinking I was helping them with genuine emergencies and basic survival needs. But the autopay utilities I had discovered added another $32 over the same period. This was money I had been paying without even realizing it, while they simultaneously asked me for help with utility bills that I was already covering automatically. So in total, I had given them $57,864 over 24 months. That's $2,411 per month, every single month, for 2 solid years. That was more than most people pay for rent. That was more than some people make in an entire month. And what did I have to show for it? A $20 Walmart gift card and a lecture about family loyalty from people who had been systematically robbing me blind. But the financial analysis was just the beginning of my investigation. I started looking at their social media accounts with completely new eyes, taking screenshots of everything that showed them spending money they supposedly didn't have. What I found was a detailed record of their actual lifestyle, completely contradicting the poverty story they had been selling me for years. There were Facebook posts about dinners at Olive Garden, Outback Steakhouse, and P.F. Chang's. These weren't special occasions or birthday celebrations. These were just random Tuesday night dinners out. My mother would post pictures of her meals with captions like, "Treating ourselves tonight," and "Date night with my hubby." If they were struggling as much as they claimed, how were they affording $60 dinners multiple times per month? Dylan's Instagram stories were particularly revealing. He was constantly showing off new clothes, new shoes, and new electronics that definitely weren't in his budget based on his comic store income. I saw posts featuring a $300 mechanical keyboard for his gaming setup, a $200 pair of sneakers because his old ones were getting worn out, and concert tickets to shows that I didn't even know he was attending. Each individual purchase might not have been huge, but they added up to serious money being spent on non-essential items. My mother's Pinterest boards were full of home decor purchases that she had been making regularly. New throw pillows, decorative vases, scented candles, wall art, and other accessories that were purely cosmetic. Again, small stuff individually, but it easily added up to hundreds of dollars each month in purchases that had nothing to do with basic survival needs. And then there were my father's hobby expenses, which I had never really paid attention to before. He was heavily into model trains, which is a fine hobby, but those components aren't cheap. I could see evidence of new locomotive models, track pieces, and landscape materials for his elaborate layout in the garage. He was easily spending $200 to $300 per month on his train collection while simultaneously asking me for help with emergency expenses. All of this discretionary spending was happening while they were crying poverty to me and asking for help with basic necessities like rent and utilities. But the real smoking gun was Dylan's TikTok account, which I had never bothered to check before because I didn't think he had much of a following. He had been posting videos about his lifestyle, his side hustles, and his advice for young people trying to make it in the world. In one video from about 2 months earlier, he had talked extensively about his financial strategy. The key to success is diversifying your income streams, he had confidently told the camera. I work part-time at the comic store, but I also do freelance art commissions, sell stuff online through various platforms, and I've got family support for my creative projects. You can't rely on just one source of income these days if you want to live comfortably. Family support for his creative projects. That's what he called it. That's how he described the thousands of dollars I had been sending to keep their household afloat. In another video, he had given a tour of his room, showing off his gaming setup, his art supplies, and his extensive collectibles collection. People ask me all the time how I afford all this stuff on a part-time salary, he had said with a smug grin. It's all about priorities and having people in your life who believe in your vision and want to see you succeed. People who believe in your vision. People like his older brother who had been unknowingly funding his lifestyle for years while working full-time and living more modestly than any of them. The comments on his videos were particularly enlightening and infuriating. There were lots of young guys asking for advice on how to get family support for their own creative endeavors. Dylan's responses were basically a masterclass in emotional manipulation and financial abuse. You have to make them feel like they're investing in something bigger than just you, he had written in one comment. Frame it as temporary help while you build something amazing that will benefit everyone. Always have a crisis that makes saying no feel impossible, he had advised another commenter. People can't argue with emergencies. Make sure they know you appreciate them, but don't overdo it or they'll get suspicious, was another gem from his collection of manipulation tactics. He had literally turned my financial abuse into content creation. He was monetizing the systematic exploitation of his own family member and giving advice to other people on how to do the same thing. Armed with this new information, I decided to do a comprehensive audit of my credit reports and financial accounts to see what other surprises might be waiting for me. What I found was even worse than I had initially feared. The personal loan I had discovered earlier was just the tip of the iceberg. There were 2 credit cards that I didn't know about. Both opened in my name using my social security number, but with their address and contact information listed on the accounts. The first card had a $3,000 limit and was almost completely maxed out. When I looked at the charges, they were all over the place. Grocery stores, gas stations, restaurants, and online purchases. These were normal, everyday expenses, the kind of things you would use a credit card for if you were living beyond your means and needed to bridge the gap between your income and your lifestyle. The second credit card had a $5,000 limit and had been used primarily for larger purchases. There was a $200 payment to Best Buy, an $800 charge to Ashley Furniture, and a $650 purchase from Dick's Sporting Goods. All of these were purchases that would fit perfectly with their improved lifestyle and Dylan's various hobbies and interests. Both cards were being kept current with minimum payments, so they weren't showing as delinquent on my credit report. But they were definitely affecting my credit utilization ratio and would eventually start impacting my credit score if the balances continued to grow. But the most disturbing discovery was a joint checking account that I didn't remember opening. It was at a different bank than my primary account, and it had been opened in 2021 with both my name and my father's name listed as account holders. This account had been used as a central clearinghouse for all of their financial manipulation. My direct deposits from work weren't going into this account, but there were regular transfers from my main account that I had authorized for legitimate bill-paying purposes. What I didn't know was that this account was also receiving deposits from multiple other sources. My father's paychecks when he was actually working, Dylan's paychecks from the comic store, payments from the fraudulent personal loan, and cash deposits from unknown sources. It all went into this account, and then payments went out to cover their actual expenses. Looking at 3 years of statements, I could see exactly how they had been managing their entire financial system. My money was being used to cover their basic living expenses, rent, utilities, food, insurance, while their money was being used for everything else: entertainment, hobbies, luxury purchases, and Dylan's car payment. They had essentially created a system where I was their financial foundation, allowing them to spend their own income on whatever they wanted while I unknowingly subsidized their basic cost of living. I was funding their lifestyle while living more modestly than any of them. The bank statements also revealed some very interesting patterns that I hadn't noticed before. There were large cash withdrawals happening on a regular basis, always in round numbers like $200 or $300. When I cross-referenced these withdrawals with my father's location data, he had shared his location with the family through iPhone's Find My app for safety reasons, I discovered that most of these withdrawals were happening near the local casino. So not only was I funding their basic lifestyle and Dylan's creative pursuits, I was also inadvertently funding my father's gambling habit. The level of deception was absolutely breathtaking. This wasn't just a family asking for help during tough times. This was a coordinated, systematic effort to extract as much money from me as possible while maintaining plausible deniability about what they were actually doing with it. They had been playing a long con, and I had been the perfect mark. Trusting, generous, and too focused on being a good family member to ask the hard questions that would have exposed their scheme years earlier. At this point, I had enough evidence to prosecute them for identity theft, fraud, and probably several other crimes. But I realized that sending them to jail, while emotionally satisfying, wouldn't actually solve my problem or get my money back. Instead, I decided on a more strategic approach. I was going to cut them off completely and let them face the natural consequences of their actions without their safety net. But I was also going to make sure they understood exactly why it was happening. First, I gathered every single piece of evidence I could find: bank statements, credit reports, screenshots of their social media posts showing their spending, copies of all the fraudulent loan documents, everything. I organized it all chronologically in a massive binder, creating a detailed timeline that showed exactly how their deception had evolved and escalated over the years. Then I did something I probably should have done years earlier. I calculated exactly how much money I had given them, both knowingly and unknowingly, over the entire period of our financial relationship. Direct transfers for supposed emergencies, 47,832. Auto-pay utilities that I didn't know about, 10,032. Fraudulent personal loan taken out in my name, 8,500 credit card charges on cards I didn't authorize, $7,200 joint account subsidies for their lifestyle, $1,400 miscellaneous other expenses I had covered, $3,600. The total was $92,564 over 4 years. That was more than I made in an entire year, handed over to people who were simultaneously living better than me and constantly complaining about being broke. But the money was just part of the equation. The real issue was the betrayal, the lies, and the systematic manipulation they had used to turn me into their personal financial resource. They had spent years conditioning me to see their problems as my responsibility and their crises as my emergencies to solve. I decided that the punishment should fit the crime. They had been lying to me about being broke while living off my money? Fine. Let them actually be broke and see how they liked it. They had been taking my financial support for granted? Fine. Let them learn what life looked like without a safety net. They had been treating me like an ATM instead of a family member? Fine. Let them find out what happens when the ATM stops dispensing cash. The day after my birthday dinner, I took a personal day off work and spent it making phone calls. I had been planning this for weeks, but Dylan's car and my insulting gift card had given me the final push I needed to actually follow through. First call, the electric company. I need to cancel service at my parents' address effective immediately, I told the customer service representative. Any particular reason for the cancellation, sir? I'm moving and won't need service at that location anymore, I said simply. That was it. Account closed. Service scheduled to be disconnected within 24 hours. Second call, the gas company. Same process, same result. No questions asked, no complications. Third call, the water department. Again, no issues. Service terminated immediately. Fourth call, the internet provider. This one was slightly more complicated because they apparently had a 2-year contract, but I was willing to pay the early termination fee just to make my point. The cost was worth it to cut off one more piece of their subsidized lifestyle. Fifth call, trash pickup service. I even canceled their garbage collection because at this point, why not? If they wanted to live like freeloaders, they could deal with managing their own trash removal. Next, I called their landlord directly. I had met him a few times over the years when I had helped with various rental issues, and he seemed like a reasonable guy. I explained that I needed to be removed from their lease immediately and that I wouldn't be responsible for any future rent payments. "Marcus, I've been wondering when this call would come," he said, with a knowing tone in his voice. "Your parents have been late on rent 3 of the last 6 months. The only reason I haven't started eviction proceedings is because I knew you were on the lease as a guarantor and would eventually cover whatever they couldn't pay." "Well, you won't have that safety net anymore," I told him firmly. "I'm sending you written notice today that I'm terminating my responsibility for that lease effective immediately." "I understand completely. I can't say I blame you," he replied. "I've seen this situation before with families. Sometimes people need to learn the hard way." Then I went to the bank and closed the joint checking account, the one that had $2,147 in it that I had just deposited for their monthly expenses. I transferred every single penny back to my primary account where it belonged. After that, I went to the phone store and changed my phone number. New SIM card, completely new number. I didn't give the new number to anyone in my family. I kept my old phone active for a few days just to watch the inevitable meltdown unfold. But I wasn't planning to answer any of their calls or respond to their messages. Finally, I blocked all of them on every social media platform and email account I had. Complete communication blackout. No way for them to reach me, manipulate me, or try to guilt me into resuming my role as their financial savior. Then I sat back and waited for the chaos to begin. 4 hours after I cut off their utilities, my phone started buzzing with frantic calls and increasingly desperate text messages. The progression was exactly what I had expected, and honestly, it was somewhat satisfying to watch their panic unfold in real time. My parents initially claimed complete confusion about the account closures, acting as if they had no idea why their power and water had suddenly been shut off. They sent me messages asking if there had been some kind of mistake with the utility companies, or if I knew anything about what was happening. They were still trying to maintain the fiction that they didn't know I had been paying their bills. Dylan's messages were more demanding and entitled. He was furious that his internet had been cut off right in the middle of an important live stream he was doing, and he wanted me to fix the situation immediately. He seemed genuinely shocked that his gaming setup and content creation were being affected by something as mundane as unpaid utility bills. As the hours passed, their messages escalated from confusion to panic to outright guilt-tripping. My mother started sending me long, emotional texts about how they were sitting in the dark with no power, and how this was affecting her medical conditions. She claimed that she needed to keep certain medications refrigerated and that I was literally endangering her health by cutting off their electricity. My father's messages focused on the practical problems my actions were creating. How was he supposed to look for work without internet access? How could they function as a household without basic utilities? Why was I being so cruel and vindictive over what he called a simple misunderstanding? But Dylan's text message on the 4th day really revealed their mindset and showed me exactly how they viewed our entire relationship. "Look, Marcus, I know you're pissed about the birthday thing and we can work that out, okay? We'll make it up to you somehow. But you can't just turn off our power like you own us or something. This is really messed up, and you need to fix it right now." He genuinely believed that I was just upset about my birthday present and that this was some kind of tantrum I was throwing. He completely missed the years of financial abuse, the identity theft, the systematic manipulation, and the utter disrespect they had shown me. In his mind, this was just his dramatic older brother being petty about not getting a nice enough gift. The entitlement in that message was staggering. Even when facing the consequences of their actions, he still thought he could demand that I solve their problems immediately. Within the first week, though, they managed to get emergency assistance from multiple sources. Apparently, there are county programs, churches, and nonprofit organizations that will help families who suddenly find themselves without utilities. Who knew? They had their power restored within 10 days of losing it, using resources that had been available to them all along, but that they had never bothered to pursue because it was easier to just take money from me. The supposed medical emergency with my mother's refrigerated medications magically disappeared once they actually handled the problem themselves. Funny how that worked out. But without my ongoing financial support, their carefully constructed house of cards began to collapse in predictable ways. Dylan's $847 monthly car payment became completely impossible when they actually had to pay their own bills alongside their rent and other actual expenses. After missing 2 payments, he tried to sell the Camaro, but he was upside down on the loan, meaning he owed more than the car was worth. So selling it would have required him to come up with several $1,000s just to get out of the financing agreement. When Dylan realized he couldn't sell the car without taking a massive financial hit, he tried a different approach. He started calling me from different phone numbers, trying to manipulate me into taking over the car payments myself. His logic was that since I was obviously successful and financially stable, I should just assume responsibility for the car loan and let him keep driving it. In his mind, this was a reasonable solution that would solve everyone's problems. I ignored every single one of these calls. After missing the third monthly payment, Dylan's precious Camaro got repossessed right from the parking lot of Comic Universe while he was at work. The public embarrassment of having his car towed away in front of his coworkers and customers was apparently devastating to his carefully crafted image. Without reliable transportation, Dylan's chronic lateness and absenteeism at work got even worse than it had been before. The comic book store started reducing his hours because he kept showing up late or calling in with excuses about not being able to get to work. This led to several write-ups in his employee file and eventually resulted in his termination for unreliability. Now unemployed and without a car, Dylan had no choice but to move back in with our struggling parents, who were barely managing to keep their own heads above water without my financial support. The dynamic in their household shifted dramatically. Dylan went from being the golden child with unlimited potential to being another financial burden that my parents couldn't afford to support. The stress of actually having to manage their own finances without a safety net started taking a serious toll on my parents' relationship. They began fighting constantly about money, spending, and responsibility. My father's gambling habit became a major source of conflict when my mother discovered that he had been taking money from their already tight budget to feed his casino addiction. My mother's mysterious medical conditions seemed to improve dramatically when she was forced to actually look for work to help cover their expenses. Suddenly, her fibromyalgia wasn't debilitating enough to prevent her from getting a part-time job at a local retail store. Her chronic fatigue syndrome became manageable when the alternative was losing their housing. My father was forced to take whatever work he could find and actually keep it, rather than quitting every job after a few months because it was beneath him. Amazing how necessity could cure his attitude problem and work ethic issues. Dylan spent most of his time at home playing video games and complaining about how unfair life was, while occasionally making half-hearted attempts to find new employment. His grand plans for content creation and artistic success were put on hold indefinitely because he couldn't afford the equipment and lifestyle necessary to maintain his online presence. Meanwhile, I was finally living my own life for the first time in years. Without the constant drain of their financial emergencies, I was able to pay down my student loans aggressively, build up a substantial emergency fund, and even start dating seriously. I had money left over after paying my own bills, imagine that.